The following research observes the role of religious institutions in the Scarborough area. While some religious denominations, particularly those belonging to immigrant communities, are clustered together, older religious groups tend to be more widely dispersed. The following research examines the reasons behind these religious clusters and how the secularization of Canadian society impacts the religiosity of immigrant communities. Through mapping, academic research, and coding analysis, we believe that these religious centers play a vital role in the transition of immigrants arriving to a new country. Furthermore, we believe that as new generations of Canadians are born into immigrant families, the connection to religion for these people weakens, resulting in fewer clusters of religious institutions and fewer people attending as generations progress.
To better understand religious institutions in Scarborough, we chose 3 methods. The first method was mapping out all of the religious centers located in this area. Once we had mapped the religious centers, we got a better understanding of the spatial positioning of these centers and began to speculate on what these spatial patterns could mean. We then went on to do background research. The purpose of this was to use academic articles to understand why religious centers would be positioned throughout the city in the ways that they were. For example, we wanted to understand why some religious centers clustered in areas more than others. Lastly, we coded all religious centers based on various services that they offered. This coding was done through an analysis of religious centers' websites. The final counts were then collected and put into charts for easy analysis. We began our spatial analysis by mapping various religious institutions that were east of the Don Valley Parkway and west of Pickering. Even though we originally planned to expand our parameters, once we began researching different religious organizations, we realized that Scarborough is home to many organizations including Islamic mosques, Jewish synagogues, Hindu temples, Buddhist temples, Catholic churches, Orthodox churches, Baptist churches, Presbyterian churches, and Chinese churches. While Scarborough is home to a variety of religious organizations, the map that we created clearly shows some religious institutions cluster in certain areas while others are more spread out throughout the region. The map illuminated the clustering of mosques, Hindu temples, synagogues, and Chinese churches, which all belong to immigrant communities. Other Christian denominations and Buddhist temples were dispersed throughout the region. In order to better understand the clustering and dispersion of certain religious institutions in Scarborough, we began our background research with Bayer's work on the development of religiosity in Canada. Bayer suggests that market theory, mostly relevant in the case of the United States, and secularization theory, mostly relevant to Europe, are both applicable in the Canadian context. Market theory suggests that religious institutions compete with one another on a supply and demand basis similar to markets. Secularization theory, however, suggests that Canadian society, similar to Europe, has distanced itself from religion, and as a result, religious attendance has declined. According to Bayer, since European colonization, religious organizations in Canada have consisted of multiple Christian denominations that were on the rise until World War II. Since the 1960s, however, there has been a secularization of Canadian society that consists of limited attendance despite a population that considers itself as religious. This secularization could also be explained with market theories that suggest the low demand of religious institutions make their regulation and supply irrelevant. Another relevant factor to our research was immigration into Canada. According to Murdy and Gosh, in 2006, immigrants made up approximately 20% of the country's population. Between 2001 and 2006 also, 70% of immigrants arriving in Canada decided to settle in Toronto. Philip Connor's article on religiosity in Canada states that when an immigrant moves to a new country, religion serves as an anchor to connect them with their country of origin and provide them social opportunities to interact with other like-minded individuals. Over time, however, the immigrant assimilates to their newfound society. In this case, with assimilation into Canadian society, immigrants move away from religion and secularize in a similar manner to Christian denominations in the 1960s. We found that many immigrants moved to ethnic enclaves, which are neighborhoods dominated by a particular ethnic group and marked by institutions reflecting its cultural values and symbols. These institutions include the religious centers that we studied, and the stability of South Asian and Chinese enclaves in Toronto correlated with our findings in the clustering of Hindu temples, mosques, and Chinese churches. The location of these enclaves also corresponded with the religious clusters found in our spatial analysis.
Through our spatial analysis, we found that the group with the highest clustering within Scarborough is the South Asian enclave, and this consisted of mosques and Hindu temples. The group with the highest visible clustering is the Hindu temples that are predominantly in the west end of Scarborough, directly south of the 401 expressway. However, there are 4 outliers, but the majority of these temples are around the Scarborough town center. Mosques are also predominant in this region, yet their clustering is more distant and expands both north and east, covering a more extensive area. Through our research, we found that there were a large clustering of South Asian religious institutions within Scarborough. This led us to believe that the immigrant population in this area must be relatively high and mostly consists of South Asian residents. Through our academic research, we found that immigrants tend to get closer to their religion when they move to a new country, as it is one of the few things that reminds them of where they came from, and it is an opportunity for them to get acquainted with people who are most similar to themselves. Most sects of Christianity are scattered through the area with no apparent clustering of a particular sect. The Chinese churches in our sample are the only sect to be clustered in the northwest area of Scarborough. This may be due to ethnic clustering of a Chinese community within that region. Scarborough is host to several South Asian and Chinese enclaves that correspond with our spatial analysis of religious organizations in the city. The findings further illuminate the role of religion in the lives of immigrants, particularly in the first few years in Canada. However, over time, these immigrants assimilate into the secularized norms of their host society and begin to lose their attendance to these religious institutions. Kadir, Sandeep Agrawal, and Lovell have created a report that also shows the religious enclaves that they have found within the city of Toronto. As you can see, the map on the left is the Chinese churches that we have mapped out within Scarborough, while the map on the right also shows a very similar Chinese enclave within Scarborough as well, located in the same region as the churches. Through our spatial analysis mapping, one of the interesting outcomes was the fact that the number of Jewish synagogues within Scarborough was so small. As seen in the maps we created, Figure 1, there are only 3 Jewish synagogues within Scarborough. Connor mentions that as immigrants groups enter Canada, the level of religiosity in their lives increases. However, as time progresses, the level of religiosity slowly begins to decrease among immigrants. Kadir et al.'s article shows that the Jewish population of Toronto has seen a 12.6% decrease in size between 2001 and 2006. This statistic goes to show that within Toronto, the Jewish population has not been increasing in terms of migration. As a result, this group would fall into Connor's category of a religious group who has been in Canada for a long period, which is now seeing a decline in religiosity. According to Kadir et al., the Jewish enclave is also closer to the North York region and as such is outside the borders of our study.
We began our coding process by visiting the websites of religious centers within Scarborough and collecting and analyzing data based on what was available on these sites. The collected data was then categorized into services that were commonly offered by all religious institutions. The collection was in a binary form that counted the number of services in each denomination. It also considered whether the services were provided for free or needed to be paid for. Through this coding process, we tried to understand the different services that the religious institutions offer and how this changes from one group of religious organizations to the next. The categories that we used to code these websites included whether or not they offered after-school religious and non-religious programs. These programs included after-school classes that took place every day after school, a few times a week, or even on weekends. In relation to the non-religious classes, this consisted of tutoring classes, homework groups, and sports teams. We also coded whether or not these institutions offered classes for adults and whether they were religious or non-religious classes. We also chose to include student summer programs, general and necessity social services, and whether or not these institutions also had elementary and high school education available. In regards to the social services, our coding defined general services as marriage and funeral services, counseling, etc., while necessity social services referred to services that were offered to those in need, which could include feeding the less fortunate, free tax clinics, shelter and food programs, etc. The services offered by these institutions were analyzed to find if any patterns may contribute to why certain groups are clustered together and to see if market theory or secularization theory may apply.
As a result, during our coding analysis, we chose to focus primarily on the services that these religious institutions offer. Through this, we could get a better understanding of how residents use these religious centers. For example, is it simply for worship and prayer, or are these places of worship being used for extracurricular activities, education, social work, etc.? Through our spatial analysis, we found that almost all of the mosques offered after-school religious programs for youth on a daily basis. This consisted of children attending class Monday to Friday or on a weekly basis in order to be educated in religious studies. Furthermore, while many other religious institutions offered similar services, we found that almost all of the mosques had a fee for this service, and that the Anglican Church, along with many others, offered similar services for free. This may be as a result of supply and demand, in the sense that the demand for the services from people who visit the mosque is probably higher than those who visit an Anglican church. It can be assumed that those attending a mosque are likely to be newer immigrants, whereas those attending the Anglican Church may be second, third, or fourth generation Canadians. Based on Connor's theory, this would mean that those Canadians living in Canada for a longer period of time are less likely to consistently visit their religious institutions, which might explain why many churches visited by groups of people who have lived in Canada for a longer period of time offer a variety of services for free in order to attract more people.
Despite our findings on after-school religious programs in mosques and Anglican churches, there have been no other observable trends between different religious denominations in Scarborough. Even the trends observed in Anglican churches and mosques may have other reasons. For example, while it may seem evident the church is offering these classes free of charge to attract consumers in a secularized society, it does not cater to immigrant communities that the mosque caters to, so therefore they have different audiences. It also may be due to the fact that churches collect money from their congregations differently than mosques do. For example, many churches ask for donations at the end of religious services, while many mosques may not perform the same tasks.
Despite the difference in clustering and immigration patterns, many of the organizations analyzed offered similar services to their congregations. There is also no clear pattern of association between the services provided by immigrant religious centers in comparison to each other or to those institutions that have been in Canada for a longer period. This matches Agrawal's findings that religious ties may be more pronounced in one group rather than another. Therefore, while the presence of ethnic enclaves leads to a clustering of ethnic religious organizations within an area, different religious institutions do not compete in providing services and attracting new members to their congregation in Scarborough at this time.